It is book review Sunday, and I have been away for about 3 weeks now. My husband and I were on an anniversary trip, and then I got sick after that and definitely couldn't do a review while I was coughing and sounding raspy. And so today I have 3 weeks worth of reading to get through, but that would be a super long video. So I'm going to chop it up into three shorter videos to go with the weeks that the video would have come out if I hadn't taken such a long break. And before I get into any of the books for this video, I am adding a new element to my reviews where if what I'm reviewing is a romance, which most of the books I read are, but one of the books I'm reviewing today isn't, then I'm going to let you know what the heat level is because different readers like different levels of romance. Some want sweet romance uh, without sex, others want the steamy, spicy scenes. And so you want to know that before you pick up the book. Otherwise, you feel like your money was wasted. So I am going to use an article that I found when I was trying to figure out the heat level of my own book that comes out in October. And so I found this article written by Jenna Hart, Heat Levels in Romance Novels, a guide for authors. And so I use this guide. So sweet means that there's nothing explicit or vulgar, and it doesn't have a lot of kissing or much physical contact or any. And there's no instances or reference of arousal. Then we have warm, which is where there is kissing, and the kissing can lead to sexual encounter, but it doesn't show the sexual encounter. It's kind of like a behind closed doors. The curtains are blowing in the wind. And my book that comes out in October is a warm heat level. Next is sensual. This does show the intimacy. We're there with the characters. It's pretty explicit, but not super vulgar language. The next level is spicy. The sex is explicit. The language is vulgar. This is what most people imagine, or people who don't read romance, this is what they think all romance is. And then the final level is erotic, but it's not erotica because there's actually a plot line other than the sex. And so this is coarse, vulgar language. This usually goes with plot lines with BDSM, mafia romances, dark romances. When it comes to what you're going to see from me as a reviewer, the majority of the books that I end up reading and reviewing are going to fall either in warm or sensual, and some are going to fall in the spicy category. I do read the occasional sweet romance, but I'm mostly in the warm and sensual category. So with that, let's jump into today's review. For this episode, I guess I'm doing more than right now, but for this episode, I am reviewing two books. The first is our final installment in the Alpha Underground Trilogy, Book 3 by Aimee Easterling. I give this book 4 stars. Another new thing that I'm adding is the part that used to say I would add or I would change. I simply changed the wording to I wish. I felt that seemed more positive because these books are still, the stories are still good. Obviously, it earned a 4-star rating, but there's just maybe one or two elements that I wish were different. And I acknowledge that other readers may not feel the same way. They may think it was a 5-star story, and that is perfectly fine. So, what I liked about book 3, and I still am kind of coming off of my illness, so I apologize for coughing. The romance is consistent with our previous book. So sometimes in romances where the story extends into multiple books, there's stuff that happens in between, uh, or their relationship changes, but it changes in between the two books, and so the reader misses it. And none of that happened. The promises that they made that Fen and Hunter made each other at the end of the second book remain at the beginning of the third. Is their relationship still challenged? Absolutely, but it doesn't feel like they're a different couple. There are regional differences with the culture and politics of the werewolf society. So earlier books, they were in one part of the country, and where we see this differences in culture and politics is something called Alpac, where the regional werewolf packs get together once a year and basically go on a giant camp out and have to, show who's the biggest and baddest alpha kind of a thing. And so Fen is expecting, she's moved to a new area and she's in a new pack, and she's expecting all pack to be the same as her previous pack. And it's not. In her previous pack, it was a mixture, the region she lived in, it was a mixture of male and female wolves. The alpha is there, and the alpha chooses which wolves accompany him. And he usually does bring several female wolves that have the title of pack princess in order to show how beautiful their women are and maybe get some treaties going on with some arranged marriages. But the new region that Fen moves into, their all-pack is 100% male, and it's not about any of that. And so she and two other female wolves show up and are basically out of their element, but they are able to gain the respect of the male wolves that are there. And then the last thing that pleased me was that the issues from previous books are resolved by the end of this book, which I'm not going to say what those are because it's going to spoil the entire series. And then there was one thing I wish was different, and that was a clear connection between the villain and their motives for why they're doing what they're doing. So there's kind of two villains in this third book. There's the main big bad who's been throughout the entire series, a thorn in Fenn's side, and his motives are very clear. But the secondary villain who works under him and works for him, his motives are really confusing, and I don't feel like I walked away truly understanding him. And he doesn't have his own story coming up, so it's not like it's wait and see. So that was the only thing for me. But I did really enjoy the series from start to finish. And the entire series is a heat level of sensual. Second book for this episode, Dragons Walk Among Us by Dan Rice. And this book is fun for me because I'd never seen the cover. I had never read the blurb. I knew nothing about it when I decided to read it. The author, Dan, is with the same publisher as I am, the Wild Rose Press. And there's an author email chain that we're on. And when he sent out the email to say, hey, my book's been released, jump to my socials to celebrate with me, I saw the title and that was all I saw. And I fell in love with the title, Dragons Walk Among Us. That just drew me in. And so I put that on my to be read list without looking at the cover, without reading the blurb. I knew nothing about it. And so I went into this book blind. And I don't do that very often, but it was really fun to do for this one. I give Dragons Walk Among Us 5 stars. This has very unique dragon lore. I was expecting, well, I wasn't sure what I was expecting shifter where humans can shift into a dragon was my thought process. And there's kind of that, but he really changes it. So in this series, and the whole series, there's two books out, and according to Dan, two more are going to be released in the near future. In this book, dragons come from another planet, or if I remember correctly, maybe even another dimension. They're considered aliens. They were not created on Earth, they traveled to Earth. This is a young adult series, and the main characters are teenagers. And I love that the characters in this book are realistic teenagers. As a high school teacher, I get to see what modern day teenagers are like every single day. And quite often, and I noticed this even when I myself was a teenager, but one of my biggest complaints with a lot of young adult fiction is that the teenage characters are way, way more mature than their age group actually is in real life. And there are moments where my suspension of disbelief, because I mean, there are in real life mature teenagers who do act older than they are, who are more intelligent than their peers. But there are moments in YA fiction where I'm like, I don't think a teenager would really say that. And that was something my own editor would flag in my own writing. Would a teenager really say this? And so Dan's teenagers are realistic. They live in Seattle. They are liberal, in terms of their political and social viewpoints, and they're passionate about their viewpoints, which is something I see often in my classroom. He created great diversity discussions among his characters. His main character is biracial American Chinese, and she struggles with being a minority surrounded by predominantly Caucasian student body in her high school. And then one of her best friends appears, based on his name, appears to be Middle Eastern. And so they do come across racism in the story, and they navigate it together. They have discussions with their friends, and it's really great. And then the last thing that I'd like to compliment on this book is that the ending stuff leads into the next book perfectly. And I'm about 25% of the way through the next book. And so far, it's looking like my guesses are going to be correct. So we'll see how it ends, though, because I'm only 25% of the way through. And this one doesn't have a heat level because it's not a romance. Though there is romantic elements. Our main character does have a crush. One of her friends has a crush on her, so they have to navigate that. So if you like werewolf romances, check out Alpha Underground Trilogy. And if you like dragons and fantasy, check out Dragons Walk Among Us.